He opened the camera app, ready to catch her failing. Every maid before her had quit, lied, or made his triplets' lives worse. 15 caregivers, 15 failures, 15 reasons to stop hoping. So when he saw the 3 empty wheelchairs in the middle of the living room, his heart sank. Where were his children? He leaned closer to the screen, squinting at the phone in his trembling hands. And then he saw them, his paralyzed triplets, standing, wobbling, taking steps toward her outstretched arms. His phone slipped from his hands. His back hit the wall. The man who had given up on hope watched the impossible happen, live on his own screen. Marcus was on his feet. Emma, too. Samuel, the youngest, shaking but upright, moving forward with tiny, determined steps. His chest cracked open, his knees buckled. He couldn't breathe. This wasn't possible. The doctors had been clear. Permanent paralysis. No hope, no recovery. Accept it and move on. He had accepted it. He had buried hope 6 months ago, right beside his wife. But now, staring at his phone screen on the floor, watching his children defy every medical report, every specialist, every cold diagnosis, he felt something he thought was dead. Hope. It burned through his chest like fire. Cold coffee sat untouched on the counter in his penthouse office in Manhattan. The morning sunlight glinted across the polished hardwood floor. He barely noticed. He couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was seeing. His children were walking. The word felt foreign in his mind, like a language he had forgotten. He sank into the corner of the room, still watching the screen. Every muscle in his body trembled with fear, guilt, and awe. He had avoided his children for months, hiding behind monitors, hiding from hope, hiding from failure. The grief of losing his wife had hollowed him out. The paralysis of his triplets had sealed the cracks. Every night, he had begged the universe for something, anything, to show that life could continue, that miracles were possible. But he had stopped believing. And now, here they were, moving, living, real. The maid, a woman named Aliyah, never looked at the cameras. She moved through the apartment with quiet purpose. Her hands were gentle as she adjusted a pillow here, lifted a tiny hand there. She sang softly, humming melodies that seemed to seep into the air itself. She had been here less than 24 hours. 24 hours. And something inside the house had shifted. He leaned closer to the phone screen, holding his breath. He almost didn't want to see, almost didn't want to hope, almost didn't want to risk another heartbreak. Then came the first miracle, a tiny twitch of a finger. He saw it clear as day on the feed. Little Marcus's hand curled ever so slightly, reaching for a toy just out of reach. His stomach dropped. His knees shook. Could this be real? Could hope arrive so quietly, in a tiny finger, a micro movement, a whisper of life? He watched every twitch, every micro improvement, every sign that his children were reclaiming parts of themselves he thought lost forever. He felt his chest tighten. He wanted to yell, to cry, to collapse, but he held back, afraid that movement, sound, or breath might shatter the fragile moment. Aliyah guided them patiently. She encouraged them softly, adjusting their posture, singing, telling stories, reading lines from books with voices that danced between playful and serious. It was methodical, slow, deliberate, yet every small step, every attempt, every faltering wobble brought him closer to tears. He realized that this wasn't just progress. This was rebellion against impossibility. Every caregiver before had failed because they had tried too hard, pushed too fast, or given up at the first sign of resistance. But she believed in persistence, in love, in miracles happening quietly, invisibly, behind the walls, in the corners of a living room that had once been a cage. By mid-morning, Marcus could lift his head steadily. Emma's fingers twitched in rhythm with Aaliyah's song. Samuel, the youngest, managed to push himself upright with a trembling effort. Each success was a micro cliffhanger. Each failure or near fall, a suspenseful beat. The father could barely breathe, glued to the screen, watching what no medical professional had promised could ever happen. He was watching hope unfold in real time. The days stretched. Every 25 seconds on the camera, something happened that forced him to keep watching. A chair teetered. A hand brushed a table. A laugh escaped. A sound he hadn't heard in months. He kept whispering apologies to the empty room, to the children, to his late wife. "I failed you," he murmured. "I didn't know how to fight. I didn't know how to hope." And yet, he also whispered thanks. "Thank you, Aaliyah. Thank you for believing when I could not." The emotional roller coaster was relentless. Pain stacked upon hope stacked upon breakthrough. He remembered the betrayal of every prior caregiver, the cold medical reports, the silent nights spent crying alone in his Connecticut estate, staring out at empty rooms. He remembered his wife's smile, the way she had loved fiercely despite the odds. He remembered guilt, shame, hopelessness. But now each memory carried a spark of something else. Possibility. Aaliyah became more than a caregiver. She became the heartbeat of the household. She moved with purpose. Her belief shaped miracles in real time. The father began to notice patterns, how she touched them, how she whispered encouragement, how she refused to speak of impossibility. She didn't call it magic, didn't promise the moon. But somehow, step by step, she delivered the impossible. Marcus lifted his arm to touch her hand for the first time. Emma rolled to her side without assistance. Samuel managed to sit upright, wobbly but determined. Each act built on the last, a perfect arc of escalating miracles. Every night, he replayed the footage, frame by frame. He memorized every twitch, every smile, every shiver of movement. He could see Aaliyah's patience, her soft hums, the tiny corrections, the gentle prods that pushed his children toward life. He felt the full weight of his own failings, of his own fear, of every moment he had hidden behind walls and monitors instead of touching, helping, loving. And yet, he also felt awe, gratitude, wonder. He was witnessing something profound, something that defied expectation. His phone buzzed in his hand, a notification, a meeting reminder for his tech company in Silicon Valley. He ignored it. Nothing mattered but this. Nothing mattered but them. He watched Marcus reach for a stuffed bear, watched Emma giggle as Aaliyah tickled her palm, watched Samuel's eyes light up with determination as he tried again and again and again. And in that moment, hidden in his penthouse office, the billionaire who had everything and nothing all at once realized something. Miracles don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, in the hands of those who refuse to give up. He hadn't trusted a caregiver in 8 months, not since the last one stole his wife's jewelry and left his children crying in soiled sheets. 15 caregivers, 15 disasters. The first one quit after 3 days, said the children were too much work. The second lasted a week before she was caught on camera scrolling through her phone while Marcus choked on his food. The third stole medication. The fourth lied about her credentials. The fifth, sixth, and seventh all walked out without notice, leaving his paralyzed triplets alone in an empty penthouse. By the eighth caregiver, he had stopped hoping for competence. He just wanted someone who wouldn't make things worse. He didn't get that either. Number 9 slapped Emma across the face when she wouldn't stop crying. He saw it on the hidden camera and fired her within the hour. Number 10 was drunk on the job. Number 11 sold stories about his family to tabloids. Number 12 quit the moment she realized the children couldn't walk, couldn't move, couldn't do anything on their own. "I didn't sign up for this," she had said, throwing her bag over her shoulder and walking out the door. Number 13, 14, and 15 were all variations of the same failure. Impatient. Careless. Cold. Each one broke him a little more. Each one reminded him that hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. And now, Aaliyah was number 16. He had hired her out of desperation, not belief. Her resume was thin. Her references were vague. Her interview had been quiet, almost too quiet. She didn't make promises, didn't boast about experience, didn't try to impress him with credentials or charm. She just looked at him with steady eyes and said, "I'll take care of them." He didn't believe her. He had heard those words 15 times before, but he was out of options. The agency had no one else. His assistants were exhausted from cycling through caregivers. His lawyers were tired of settlement negotiations with former employees who threatened lawsuits. So he hired her, gave her the keys, showed her the cameras, told her the rules. And then he retreated to his office in Manhattan, watching from a distance, waiting for her to fail like all the others. He expected her to quit by morning. She didn't. He expected her to ignore the children, to sit on her phone, to take shortcuts, to complain. She didn't. Instead, she did something none of the others had done. She stayed. Not just physically. She stayed present, engaged, patient. He watched her on the cameras, hour after hour, expecting the cracks to show. Expecting the moment she would snap, walk out, give up. It never came. By the second day, he was confused. By the third day, he was suspicious. By the fourth day, he was terrified. Because Aaliyah wasn't just staying. She was changing things. Marcus, who hadn't smiled in months, giggled when she sang to him. Emma, who flinched at every touch, leaned into Aaliyah's hands when she brushed her hair. Samuel, the youngest, who had stopped trying to move at all, reached for her fingers when she held them out. It was small, subtle, easy to miss. But he saw it, and it scared him. Because hope, after so much loss, felt dangerous. His wife had been hope. She had been the one who believed, who fought, who refused to give up even when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do. She had held the triplets every night, whispering promises that everything would be okay. And then she died. Suddenly, unexpectedly, a brain aneurysm that took her in her sleep. One moment she was there, the next she was gone. He had found her in the morning, cold and still, her hand resting on the baby monitor as if she had been listening to the children even in her final moments. The grief had destroyed him. He stopped going to the children's room, stopped holding them, stopped looking at their faces because all he saw was her. All he felt was loss. The paralysis had happened 2 weeks later. A rare neurological condition the doctors couldn't explain. One day the triplets were moving, playing, babbling. The next, they couldn't lift their arms, couldn't sit up, couldn't do anything but lie still and stare at the ceiling. The doctors said it was permanent, irreversible, a tragedy on top of a tragedy. He had nodded, signed the papers, hired the first caregiver, and locked himself away. He couldn't handle more loss, couldn't handle more hope, couldn't handle the possibility that things might get better only to collapse again. So he built walls, installed cameras, watched from a distance. It was easier that way. Safer. Until Aliyah. She didn't ask about his wife, didn't pry into his grief, didn't try to fix him. She just focused on the children. And somehow, that focus began to crack the walls he had built. He watched her every move, the way she adjusted their pillows so they could see out the window, the way she read to them, her voice soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby, the way she massaged their tiny hands and feet, whispering encouragement even when they couldn't respond. "You're stronger than you know," she would say. "You're going to surprise everyone." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to hope. But 15 failures had taught him that hope was a trap. So he watched, and waited, and prepared for her to fail. But she didn't. Day after day, she showed up, stayed present, pushed forward, and slowly, impossibly, the children began to respond. Marcus's fingers twitched when she sang. Emma's eyes tracked her movements across the room. Samuel made a sound, a tiny coo, the first noise he had made in weeks. The father watched it all from his office, gripping his phone, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to run to them, wanted to hold them, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. But fear held him back. Because if he hoped again, and it failed again, he didn't think he would survive it. So he stayed in the shadows, watching, waiting, afraid. And Aliyah kept working, kept believing, kept pushing forward as if failure wasn't even an option. She had no idea that the man paying her salary was watching her every move. She had no idea that every small success she achieved with the children was breaking him apart and putting him back together at the same time. She had no idea that she was the first person in 8 months to make him believe that maybe, just maybe, miracles were still possible. But he knew, and it terrified him. Because hope, after so much loss, felt like the most dangerous thing in the world. Marcus's finger moved, just once, just barely. But it moved. He saw it happen live on the camera feed at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. His breath caught in his throat. He rewound the footage, watched it again, and again, and again. Marcus's tiny hand, which hadn't moved in 6 months, curled ever so slightly toward a toy truck just out of reach. It was real. His son had moved. The doctors had said it was impossible. Permanent nerve damage, no hope of recovery. The best they could do was keep the children comfortable and wait. Wait for what? He had asked. The doctor had looked away, hadn't answered. Now, staring at the screen, watching his son's finger twitch toward that red toy truck, he felt his entire world tilt sideways. This wasn't supposed to happen. This couldn't happen. But it did. He zoomed in on the camera feed, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone. He watched Aliyah kneel beside Marcus, her hand gently supporting his back. She wasn't forcing anything, wasn't pushing. She was just there, calm and steady, humming a soft melody. "You can do it," she whispered. "Just a little more." And Marcus tried again. His finger extended, trembled, stretched toward the truck. The father's chest exploded with emotion. Tears blurred his vision. His throat closed up. His son was trying. After months of stillness, of silence, of medical reports that promised nothing but decline, his son was fighting. He wanted to scream, wanted to run to the penthouse, wanted to burst through the door and hold Marcus in his arms. But he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch. Because if he moved, if he believed too much, if he let hope flood in completely, he was terrified it would all disappear. Hope had betrayed him before. It had taken his wife. It had taken his children's mobility. It had taken 15 caregivers who promised help and delivered nothing. So he stayed frozen in his office, watching the impossible unfold on a screen. Aaliyah shifted Marcus slightly, adjusting his posture. She placed the truck closer, just within reach. "Try again," she said softly. "I believe in you." Marcus's hand moved again. This time, his entire arm shifted. Just an inch, just a fraction. But it was movement. Real, undeniable movement. The father's knees buckled. He sank into his chair, gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles turned white. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God." He had spent 6 months preparing for the worst. 6 months accepting that his children would never walk, never run, never live the lives he had dreamed for them. And now, in less than a week, Aaliyah had done what no doctor, no therapist, no specialist had even suggested was possible. She had made his son move. He watched her work with Emma next. She placed a soft stuffed bunny in Emma's line of sight, just far enough away to require effort. "Come on, sweetheart," Aaliyah said. "You can reach it. I know you can." Emma stared at the bunny. Her eyes tracked it, focused on it. And then, so slowly it almost didn't seem real, her fingers twitched. The father gasped. His hand flew to his mouth. Emma's hand opened, closed, opened again. It was tiny, barely noticeable, but it was there. Movement, life, hope. He couldn't stop the tears anymore. They poured down his face, hot and relentless. Both of his children had moved in the same morning, both of them. After 6 months of nothing, they were responding, fighting, trying. Samuel was next, the youngest, the one who had stopped making sounds weeks ago. Aaliyah sat him upright, supporting his back with pillows. She held a small rattle in front of him, shaking it gently. "Listen to that sound," she said. "Do you hear it, Samuel? Do you want to touch it?" Samuel's eyes followed the rattle. His head, which had always lolled to the side, stayed steady for a few seconds longer than usual. And then his chest moved. Not with breath, but with effort. He was trying to sit up. The father shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. He pressed his face closer to the screen, his heart hammering in his chest. Samuel's tiny body trembled with the effort. His muscles, weak and unused for months, strained against gravity. But he didn't collapse. He stayed upright, just for a moment, just for a breath. And then Aaliyah's hands steadied him, and she whispered, "Good job, baby. You're so strong." The father collapsed against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor of his office. All 3 of them, in one morning. All 3 of his children had done something the doctors said they would never do again. They had moved. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that shook his entire body. For 6 months, he had lived in a fog of grief and despair. He had avoided his children because looking at them reminded him of everything he had lost. His wife, their future, their hope. But now, watching them fight, watching them try, watching them respond to Aaliyah's quiet belief, he realized something. He had given up on them, not because he didn't love them, but because he couldn't handle losing them too. So he had locked himself away, hidden behind cameras, pretended that distance would protect him from more pain. But it hadn't protected him. It had only made him a ghost in his own home. And while he had been hiding, Aaliyah had been fighting. She had shown up every single day, had believed when no one else did, had worked with patience and love and relentless determination. She had done what he couldn't. She had hoped. He wiped his face, his hands trembling. He looked at the screen again, watching her guide Marcus's hand toward the toy truck one more time. And this time, Marcus's fingers closed around it. He held it, gripped it, pulled it toward himself. The father's breath caught. His heart felt like it might explode. Marcus was holding a toy, by himself, without help. It was the smallest thing, the tiniest victory. But to him, it was everything. He grabbed his phone, his fingers fumbling as he typed a message to his assistant. "Clear my schedule. Cancel everything. I'm going home." He had spent 6 months running from hope, running from pain, running from the possibility of more loss. But he couldn't run anymore, because his children were fighting, and if they could fight, so could he. He stood, wiped his face, and grabbed his keys. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to go home. He couldn't remember the last time he had driven himself anywhere. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his fingers went numb. The streets of Manhattan blurred past him, horns blaring, lights flashing, but he barely noticed. All he could see was Marcus's finger moving, Emma's hand opening, Samuel sitting upright. His children were fighting, and he had been hiding. The guilt hit him like a punch to the chest. 6 months. He had avoided them for 6 months. 6 months of hiring strangers to care for them while he watched from a screen. 6 months of telling himself it was better this way. That distance would protect him from more pain. 6 months of being a coward. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Messages from his assistant, from his board members, from investors in California waiting for him to approve a merger worth millions. He ignored all of it. None of it mattered. Not the company, not the money, not the deals or the meetings or the empire he had built from nothing. All that mattered was getting home, getting to his children, seeing them with his own eyes instead of through a screen. The penthouse was 20 minutes away. It felt like 20 hours. He ran a red light. Didn't care. A cab honked at him. He didn't hear it. His mind was racing, replaying every moment he had missed. Every night he had stayed late at the office instead of going home. Every morning he had checked the cameras instead of walking into their room. He had told himself it was for their own good, that seeing him broken and grieving would only hurt them more. But the truth was simpler, crueler. He had been protecting himself, not them, because looking at them meant remembering her, his wife, the woman who had loved those children more than life itself. And remembering her meant feeling the loss all over again. So he had run, hidden, built walls between himself and the only family he had left. And while he had been hiding, they had been suffering. Alone, paralyzed, cared for by strangers who didn't love them, who didn't fight for them, who quit the moment things got hard. 15 strangers, 15 failures. And then Aaliyah, a woman he had hired out of desperation, not hope. A woman whose resume was thin, whose references were vague, whose interview had been so quiet he almost didn't hire her at all. But she had done something none of the others could. She had stayed, she had believed, she had fought. And in less than a week, she had given his children something he thought was gone forever. Hope. He pulled into the parking garage beneath the penthouse, his tires squealing as he took the turn too fast. He threw the car into park and sat there for a moment, his hands still gripping the wheel, his chest heaving. What if he was too late? What if walking in now, after 6 months of absence, only made things worse? What if his children didn't recognize him, didn't want him, didn't need him anymore? The fear was overwhelming, paralyzing. But then he remembered Marcus's finger, Emma's hand, Samuel's effort to sit up. They were fighting. The least he could do was fight too. He got out of the car and headed for the elevator. His legs felt weak. His heart pounded in his chest. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Each floor that passed brought a new wave of anxiety. What would he say to them? How would he explain where he had been? How could he possibly make up for 6 months of absence? The elevator dinged. The doors opened. He stepped into the hallway, his shoes echoing on the marble floor. The penthouse door was just ahead, the same door he had walked through 1,000 times before his wife died. Back when this place had felt like a home. Back when laughter filled the rooms and hope lived in every corner. Now it felt like a tomb, a place he had avoided because it reminded him of everything he had lost. But not anymore. He reached for the door handle, his hand trembling. And then he heard it. Laughter. Faint, but real. Coming from inside. He froze, his breath caught in his throat. It was Emma. He knew her laugh, high-pitched and sweet, the sound she used to make when his wife tickled her belly. He hadn't heard that sound in 6 months. His hand turned the handle. The door opened. The living room stretched out before him, sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The wheelchairs sat empty in the corner, exactly where he had seen them on the camera feed. And in the middle of the room, on a soft mat, were his children. Marcus was on his stomach, his arms stretched out in front of him, reaching for a toy car. Emma was on her back, giggling as Aaliyah tickled her palm. Samuel was propped up against a pillow, his eyes bright and alert, watching everything with curiosity. They were alive, moving, responding. And Aaliyah was there, kneeling beside them, her voice soft and encouraging. "That's it, Marcus. You're so close. Just a little more." Marcus's hand inched forward. His fingers brushed the toy car. He grabbed it, and the father's knees gave out. He caught himself on the doorframe, his vision blurring with tears. Aaliyah looked up, saw him. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't move, didn't speak, just watched him, calm and steady. The children didn't notice him yet. They were too focused on Aaliyah, on the toys, on the effort of moving. He wanted to run to them, wanted to scoop them up and hold them and never let go. But he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Because seeing them like this, alive and fighting and trying, broke something inside him that had been frozen for 6 months. The grief, the guilt, the fear. It all came crashing down at once. He sank to his knees in the doorway, his hands covering his face, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He had failed them. He had abandoned them when they needed him most. And yet somehow, they were still here, still fighting, still trying, because of her. Aaliyah rose slowly, crossing the room toward him. She stopped a few feet away, her voice quiet. "They've been waiting for you," she said. He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "I don't deserve them," he whispered. She didn't argue, didn't offer false comfort. She just looked at him with those steady, knowing eyes. "Maybe not," she said, "but they need you anyway." She turned and walked back to the children, kneeling beside them again. "Look who's here," she said softly, pointing toward the door. Marcus turned his head, slowly, With effort, his eyes found his father, and for the first time in 6 months, Marcus smiled. Marcus smiled at him, and he fell apart completely. He crawled across the floor toward his son, tears pouring down his face, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Marcus," he whispered. "Marcus, I'm here. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched his son's face. Marcus's skin was warm, real, alive. The boy's smile widened. His eyes, bright and clear, stared up at his father with recognition. He remembered him. After 6 months of absence, after countless nights of hiding, after all the ways he had failed, Marcus still knew who he was. The father broke, completely and utterly. He pulled Marcus into his arms, holding him close, feeling the tiny heartbeat against his chest. He buried his face in his son's hair and sobbed. "I'm sorry," he whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry." Emma made a sound, a soft coo. He looked over. She was watching him, her head turned slightly to the side, her eyes tracking his movements. He reached for her too, pulling her into his other arm. She was so small, so fragile, but she was there. She was alive. Samuel whimpered, still propped against the pillow. His eyes were wide, uncertain. The father set Marcus and Emma down gently and crawled to Samuel. He lifted him carefully, supporting his head, holding him close. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not leaving again. I promise." Samuel's tiny hand brushed against his father's shirt. Not a full grip, not a strong movement. But it was something. It was everything. The father held all 3 of them. His arms wrapped around his children, his heart breaking and healing at the same time. For 6 months, he had convinced himself that staying away was the right choice, that his grief would poison them, that his broken heart would only make things worse. But he had been wrong. They hadn't needed him to be perfect. They had needed him to be present. And he hadn't been. Aaliyah stood a few feet away, watching quietly. She didn't interrupt, didn't speak, just gave him space to feel what he needed to feel. After a long moment, he looked up at her, his face wet with tears. "How?" he asked, his voice cracking. "How did you do this?" She tilted her head slightly, considering the question. "I didn't do anything," she said. "They did. I just believed they could. The doctors said it was impossible. Doctors don't know everything." He looked down at his children, still holding them close. Marcus was playing with the toy car, his fingers gripping it with more strength than before. Emma was resting her head against his chest, her breathing steady and calm. Samuel's eyes were starting to droop, exhaustion creeping in after the effort of sitting up. "I gave up on them," the father said quietly. "I gave up on everything." Aaliyah knelt beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "You didn't give up. You were grieving. There's a difference. I should have been here. You're here now." He shook his head, guilt crashing over him in waves. "I hired 15 people before you. 15. And every single one of them failed. Some of them hurt my children. Some of them stole from me. Some of them just walked away, like they were nothing." His voice broke. "And I let it happen. I watched from a screen instead of protecting them myself." Aaliyah was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, her words cutting through his guilt like a blade. "You were afraid," she said. "Afraid of losing them the way you lost your wife. Afraid that if you got close, the pain would destroy you." He stared at her, stunned. She had only been here a week. How could she possibly know? She smiled softly. "I've worked with a lot of families," she said. "I know grief when I see it. He looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "My wife," he said quietly. "She was everything. She loved these children more than anything in the world. And when she died, I didn't know how to keep going. I didn't know how to be what they needed. So you hid." "So I hid." Aaliyah reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not hiding anymore." He looked down at his children again. Marcus had dropped the toy car and was reaching for his father's hand. Emma's fingers were curling around his shirt. Samuel had fallen asleep against his chest, his tiny body rising and falling with each breath. They needed him. Even after everything, even after 6 months of absence, they still needed him. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to be what they needed. "What do I do now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Aaliyah stood, brushing off her knees. "You stay," she said simply. "You show up, you believe, and you let them teach you how to hope again." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Can you help me?" She smiled. "I'm already here." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Aaliyah showed him the routines she had developed, how to position the children for physical therapy, how to encourage movement without forcing it, how to read the signs when they were tired or frustrated. She was patient, methodical, never rushing, never pushing. And slowly, he began to understand. This wasn't magic. It wasn't a miracle in the way he had imagined. It was work. Consistent, relentless, patient work. But it was work driven by belief, by hope, by the refusal to accept impossibility. By evening, the children were exhausted. Aaliyah helped him settle them into their cribs, tucking them in gently. Marcus reached for his father's hand one more time before closing his eyes. The father held it, his thumb brushing over his son's tiny knuckles. "I love you," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Marcus's grip tightened slightly. Not much, but enough. Enough to remind him that love, even when broken, can still hold on. He stood there long after Marcus fell asleep, watching his children breathe, feeling the weight of 6 months of absence pressing down on him. But he also felt something else. Hope. It was fragile, uncertain, terrifying. But it was there. And for the first time in 6 months, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Aaliyah appeared in the doorway, her bag slung over her shoulder. "I'll be back tomorrow morning," she said. He turned to her, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." She nodded. "Don't thank me yet," she said with a small smile. "We're just getting started." And then she was gone, leaving him alone with his children, with his grief, with his guilt, but also with hope. And that was enough. He couldn't sleep. Every sound from the nursery sent him bolt upright in bed, his heart racing, his breath caught in his throat. A whimper, a rustle of sheets, a soft cry. He was out of bed before he even thought about it, rushing down the hallway in bare feet, pushing open the nursery door. Emma was awake, her eyes wide in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. He crossed the room and knelt beside her crib, his hand reaching through the bars to touch her face. "I'm here," he whispered. "Daddy's here." She turned her head toward his voice, slowly, with effort. But she turned. His chest tightened. She was responding. She knew he was there. He stayed there for 20 minutes, his hand resting on her tiny chest, feeling the rise and fall of her breathing until she drifted back to sleep. When he finally returned to his bedroom, it was 2 a.m. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. For 6 months, he had slept through the nights, or tried to. He had taken pills to knock himself out, to silence the grief, to escape the guilt. But tonight, the pills sat untouched on his nightstand. Because tonight, he wasn't running anymore. He was listening, waiting, ready to show up the moment his children needed him. It was exhausting, terrifying, but it was also the most alive he had felt in months. At 4 a.m., Samuel cried out. He was there in seconds. Samuel's face was scrunched up, his tiny fists clenched, his body trembling. The father lifted him carefully, cradling him against his chest. "Shh, it's okay. I've got you." Samuel's crying softened. His body relaxed, and for the first time, the father felt it. The weight of responsibility, the privilege of being needed. He had spent 6 months believing that staying away was protecting his children from his pain. But the truth was, he had been protecting himself from theirs. Because being present meant feeling everything. The fear, the helplessness, the constant worry that something would go wrong. But it also meant feeling the love, the connection, the tiny moments of hope that made everything else worth it. He held Samuel until the sun began to rise, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep, but was determined to try. "I'm not leaving you again. I'm going to be here every day, every night, no matter what." When Aaliyah arrived at 7 a.m., she found him asleep in the rocking chair, Samuel still cradled in his arms. She didn't wake him. Just began preparing breakfast for the children, moving quietly through the penthouse. He woke an hour later, his neck stiff, his arms sore, but his heart fuller than it had been in months. Aaliyah glanced over from the kitchen, a small smile on her face. "Rough night?" He nodded, carefully placing Samuel back in his crib. "I couldn't sleep, kept checking on them." "That's normal," she said. "You're making up for lost time." He walked into the kitchen, pouring himself a cup of coffee. His hands were still shaking from exhaustion, but he didn't care. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you stay so calm, so patient, so steady?" Aaliyah turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Because I believe," she said simply. "I believe they can get better. I believe they're stronger than anyone gives them credit for. And I believe that belief is contagious." He stared at her, absorbing her words. The doctors said they'd never walk again. Doctors are human. They make mistakes. They seemed pretty certain. So did everyone who said the world was flat. He almost smiled. Almost. "What if you're wrong?" he asked quietly. "What if all this hope, all this work, leads nowhere?" Aaliyah met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. "Then at least we tried," she said. "At least we gave them a chance. At least we didn't give up on them before they had the opportunity to fight." Her words hit him like a freight train. He had given up. For 6 months, he had accepted the doctor's verdict as final, as unchangeable. But Aaliyah hadn't. She had walked into a situation everyone else had abandoned and decided to believe of anyway. And because she believed, his children were moving again. "Teach me," he said suddenly. "Teach me everything you're doing. I want to help. I want to be part of this." Aaliyah's smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that." The next few hours were intense. Aaliyah walked him through every exercise, every technique, every small adjustment that made a difference. How to position Marcus's legs to strengthen his muscles. How to massage Emma's arms to stimulate circulation. How to support Samuel's back so he could practice sitting upright. It was meticulous, exhausting, but also beautiful. because every tiny movement, every small improvement, was evidence that hope wasn't foolish. It was powerful. By midday, Marcus lifted his arm higher than he had the day before. Emma's fingers closed around a rattle and held it for 3 full seconds. Samuel sat upright for nearly a minute before needing support. Each success was small, incremental, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But he was paying attention now. And he saw everything. He saw the determination in Marcus's eyes as he reached for a toy just out of reach. He saw the focus in Emma's face as she tried to grip the rattle. He saw the effort in Samuel's trembling body as he fought against gravity. And he saw himself. Not the broken, grieving man who had hidden for 6 months, but the father he used to be. The father his wife had believed he could be. The father his children needed him to be. That evening, after Aliyah left, he sat on the floor with the triplets, surrounded by toys and blankets and hope. Marcus crawled toward him. Not far, just a few inches. But it was movement. Real, undeniable movement. He scooped Marcus into his arms, tears streaming down his face. "You're doing it," he whispered. "You're really doing it." Emma reached for him next, her tiny hand stretching toward his face. He took it, kissing her palm, his heart overflowing. Samuel watched from his pillow, his eyes bright and alert. The father reached for him too, pulling all 3 children close. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "I love you so much, and I'm never leaving you again." They didn't understand his words. Not yet. But they felt his presence, his warmth, his love. And that was enough. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting golden light through the penthouse windows, the father made a silent vow. He would fight for them, every single day, no matter how hard it got, no matter how many setbacks they faced. Because Aliyah had shown him something he had forgotten. Miracles don't happen to those who wait for them. They happen to those who work for them. And he was ready to work. Emma stood for the first time on a Wednesday. Not for long, just 3 seconds. But she stood. The father was holding her hands, supporting her weight, when he felt it. Her legs, weak and trembling, began to push against the floor. "Aliyah," he called out, his voice shaking. "Aliyah, look." Aliyah turned from where she was working with Marcus and Samuel. Her eyes widened. Emma's knees locked, her body straightened, her feet pressed flat against the mat. She was standing. The father's hands trembled so badly he almost lost his grip. But he held on, his eyes locked on his daughter's face. Emma's expression was pure concentration. Her tiny body shook with effort. But she didn't collapse. Not yet. 1. Aliyah counted softly. 2. 3. Emma's legs gave out. The father caught her, lowering her gently to the mat. But the damage was done. The impossible had happened. His daughter had stood. He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair, his body shaking with sobs. "You did it," he whispered. "Oh my God, Emma, you did it." Aliyah knelt beside them, her hand resting on Emma's back. "She's stronger than the doctors thought," she said quietly. "They all are." The father looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "How long until she can walk?" Aliyah's expression was careful, measured. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But if she can stand for 3 seconds today, maybe she can stand for 5 seconds tomorrow, and then 10, and then 20, and then she walks, and then she walks." Hope surged through him like electricity. He wanted to believe, wanted to trust that this wasn't just a fluke, a momentary victory that would disappear as quickly as it had come. but the fear was still there, lurking, waiting to remind him that hope had failed him before. He pushed it down, forced it back, refused to let it win, because Emma had just stood. And if she could do that, anything was possible. The next day, Marcus rolled over by himself, front to back, a full rotation. The father watched it happen in real time, his breath caught in his throat. Marcus had been lying on his stomach, reaching for a stuffed elephant, when his body shifted. His shoulder lifted, his hips turned, and then he was on his back, staring up at the ceiling, a look of surprise on his tiny face. The father dropped to his knees, his hands covering his mouth. "Did you see that?" he shouted. "Aaliyah, did you see that?" She was smiling, her eyes bright. "I saw it." Marcus did it again and again, each time getting faster, smoother, more confident. By the end of the session, he had rolled over 6 times. The father couldn't stop laughing, couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop feeling like the universe had finally decided to give him a break. His son was moving, really moving, not just twitching, not just small adjustments, full body movements, deliberate, strong. That night, he called his brother in Texas, a man he hadn't spoken to in 8 months. "They're getting better," he said, his voice cracking. "The kids, they're moving again." There was silence on the other end. Then his brother's voice, thick with emotion. "Are you serious?" "I'm serious. Emma stood yesterday. Marcus rolled over today. Samuel's getting stronger every day." His brother exhaled, a sound somewhere between disbelief and relief. "I thought the doctors said..." "The doctors were wrong." Another pause. "Does this mean you're coming back? To yourself, I mean?" The father closed his eyes, leaning against the wall of his penthouse. "I'm trying," he said quietly. "I'm really trying. That's all anyone can ask." After they hung up, the father stood at the window, staring out at the lights of Manhattan. The city stretched out before him, endless and glittering, full of people living their own battles, fighting their own wars. For 6 months, he had felt completely alone, isolated by grief, paralyzed by fear. But he wasn't alone. Not anymore. He had Aaliyah. He had his children. He had hope. And that was enough to keep fighting. By Friday, all 3 children had made progress that seemed impossible just a week earlier. Emma stood for 7 seconds. Marcus rolled over 12 times in 1 session. Samuel sat upright without support for 2 full minutes. Every small victory built on the last. Every breakthrough led to another. And the father was there for all of it. Not watching from a screen, not hiding in his office, but present, engaged, fighting alongside them. Aaliyah watched him with quiet approval. She didn't say much. Didn't need to. Her presence was steady, her belief unshakable. But the father knew the truth. He saw it in the way she moved, the way she encouraged, the way she refused to accept limits. She wasn't just a caregiver. She was a miracle worker. On Saturday morning, something shifted. Marcus sat up by himself. No pillows, no support, just his own strength. The father was brushing his teeth when he heard Aaliyah's gasp from the living room. He ran, toothpaste still foaming in his mouth, his heart pounding. Marcus was sitting, upright, steady. His tiny hands rested on his knees. His back was straight, his head was up. He looked like a normal child, like paralysis had never touched him. The father's legs gave out. He collapsed to the floor, his hands pressed against his mouth, his entire body shaking. "Marcus," he whispered. "Oh my God, Marcus." The boy turned his head toward his father's voice, and smiled. That smile broke something inside the father, something that had been holding him together through sheer willpower alone. He crawled across the floor and wrapped his arms around his son, pulling him close, sobbing into his hair. "You're doing it," he whispered. "You're really doing it." Emma watched from her mat, her eyes tracking the scene. Samuel cooed softly from his pillow, and Aaliyah stood in the corner, her arms crossed, a satisfied smile on her face. "Told you," she said quietly. "Belief is contagious." The father looked up at her, his face wet with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." She shook her head. "Don't thank me yet. We're not done." He frowned. "What do you mean?" Her smile widened. "They're not just going to sit. They're going to walk." His heart stopped. His breath caught. "You really think so?" She knelt beside him, her hand resting on Marcus's head. "I don't think so," she said. "I know so." And in that moment, looking at his son sitting upright, looking at Emma reaching for a toy, looking at Samuel's alert and focused eyes, the father allowed himself to believe. Not cautiously, not carefully, not with fear holding him back. Fully, completely, absolutely. His children were going to walk, and he was going to be there to see it. Marcus took his first step on a Monday morning. The father was on a business call with investors in California when he saw it through the glass door of his office. Marcus, standing on his own, wobbling, taking one shaky step forward. The phone slipped from his hand. He didn't pick it up. He walked slowly toward the living room, afraid that moving too fast would break the spell. Aaliyah was kneeling a few feet away from Marcus, her arms outstretched. "Come on, baby," she said softly. "Come to me. You can do it." Marcus's legs trembled, his arms stretched out for balance. His face was locked in concentration, and then he took another step, and another. The father's hand flew to his mouth, his knees buckled. Marcus was walking, actually walking, 3 steps, 4, 5, and then he fell into Aaliyah's waiting arms, giggling with triumph. The father couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he had just witnessed. His son, who the doctors said would never walk again, had just walked across the living room. Aaliyah looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Did you see?" she asked, her voice full of quiet pride. He nodded, unable to speak. She smiled. "Watch this." She set Marcus back on his feet, steadying him. Then she moved a few feet away and knelt down again. "One more time, Marcus. Come to me." Marcus hesitated. His legs shook, but he didn't give up. He took a step, then another, then another. This time he made it 7 steps before falling. The father rushed forward, catching him, pulling him close. "You did it," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You walked. You actually walked." Marcus laughed, wrapping his tiny arms around his father's neck. And in that moment, everything changed. The father realized that the impossible wasn't just possible. It was happening, right here, right now, in his arms. Emma was next. 2 days later, she stood on her own, her hands gripping the edge of the coffee table for support. The father was sitting on the couch, watching, his heart in his throat. Aaliyah was on the other side of the room, her arms open. "Come on, Emma, walk to me." Emma looked at her father, then at Aaliyah, then back at her father. She let go of the table. Her legs wobbled, her body swayed. But she didn't fall. She took one tiny, trembling step. The father leaned forward, every muscle in his body tense. Emma took another step, and another. Her arms flailed for balance, her legs shook with effort, but she kept moving, One step at a time, she crossed the living room. And when she reached Aaliyah, she collapsed into her arms with a squeal of delight. The father buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. 2 of his children were walking. 2. The doctors had said it was impossible, that the paralysis was permanent, that he should accept it and move on. But Aaliyah hadn't accepted it. She had believed. She had worked. She had fought. And now his children were walking. Samuel was the last. He was the youngest, the smallest, the one who had struggled the most. The father had watched him try and fail dozens of times over the past week, watched him push himself upright only to collapse moments later, watched him reach for toys just out of reach, his tiny body trembling with effort. It was heartbreaking, frustrating, exhausting. But Aaliyah never gave up on him, and neither did the father. On Thursday evening, Samuel stood on his own for the first time. No support, no pillows, just his own strength. The father was feeding him dinner when Samuel suddenly pushed himself up, his legs locking beneath him. The father froze, the spoon halfway to Samuel's mouth. "Aaliyah," he called out, his voice tight. "Aaliyah, come here." She appeared in the doorway, saw Samuel standing, and smiled. There he is. Samuel wobbled, his arms stretched out for balance, his face scrunched up with concentration. But he stayed upright. 5 seconds, 10, 15. And then Aaliyah knelt in front of him, her arms open. "Walk to me, Samuel. I know you can." Samuel stared at her. His legs trembled, his body swayed, and then, slowly, he lifted one foot. The father's breath caught. Samuel set his foot down, wobbled, steadied himself, and then he lifted the other foot. He was walking, slowly, shakily, but he was moving. 1 step, 2, 3. The father's vision blurred with tears. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe. Samuel took 4 more steps before his legs gave out. But Aaliyah caught him, pulling him close, laughing with joy. "You did it. Oh, Samuel, you did it." The father fell to his knees, his hands covering his face, his entire body shaking. All 3 of his children were walking. All 3. The impossible had become reality. That night, after Aaliyah left, the father sat on the floor with his children, surrounded by toys and blankets and hope. Marcus walked circles around him, giggling with delight. Emma toddled from one end of the room to the other, her arms stretched out for balance. Samuel took cautious steps, falling every few feet but getting back up each time. The father watched them, tears streaming down his face, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. 6 months ago, he had buried hope. He had accepted that his children would never walk, never run, never live normal lives. But Aaliyah had refused to accept it. She had believed when no one else did. She had worked when everyone else had given up. And because of her, his children were walking. He thought about his wife, about how much she would have loved to see this, how proud she would have been, how her face would have lit up with joy. She wasn't here, but he felt her presence, in the laughter of the children, in the warmth of the room, in the miracle that had unfolded before his eyes. "We did it," he whispered to the empty air. "Our babies are walking." Marcus stumbled and fell into his lap, laughing. Emma followed, collapsing beside him. Samuel toddled over and climbed onto his chest. The father wrapped his arms around all 3 of them, holding them close, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He had spent 6 months hiding from hope, 6 months afraid to believe, 6 months convinced that miracles were impossible. But he had been wrong. Miracles weren't impossible. They just required belief, work, patience, and someone willing to fight when everyone else had given up. Aaliyah had been that someone. And because of her, his family had been given a second chance. He closed his eyes, holding his children close, feeling their warmth, their laughter, their life. And for the first time in 6 months, he allowed himself to believe in the future. A future where his children ran and played and lived full, beautiful lives. A future he thought was lost forever. A future that had been given back to him by a woman who refused to accept impossibility. He would never forget this moment. Never forget the way his heart felt like it might explode with joy. Never forget the sound of his children's laughter as they walked across the room. This was the moment everything changed. This was the moment hope won. He found Aaliyah packing her bag on Friday morning. His stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight with panic. She looked up, her expression calm. "My contract was for 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks. You're leaving?" That was the agreement. He stared at her, his mind racing. 2 weeks. It had only been 2 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime. Like she had always been here. Like she was supposed to stay forever. "You can't leave," he said, his voice cracking. "The children need you." She zipped her bag slowly, deliberately. "The children need you," she corrected. "They always have. But you're the one who made this happen. You're the one who got them walking again." She shook her head. "I didn't make anything happen. I just believed it could. And now you believe it too." He took a step toward her, his hands trembling. "Stay," he said. "Please. I'll pay you anything. Double. Triple. Whatever you want." Aaliyah met his eyes, her gaze steady. "This isn't about money. Then what is it about?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "It's about you learning that you don't need me. You never did. You just needed to believe in yourself again." His throat tightened. His eyes burned with tears. "I don't know if I can do this without you." "Yes, you can." "What if something goes wrong? What if they regress? What if I mess this up?" She crossed the room and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you figure it out. You adapt. You keep fighting. That's what parents do." "I'm not a good parent," he whispered. "I abandoned them for 6 months. And then you came back. You showed up. You learned. You fought. That's what matters." He shook his head, unable to accept her words. "They wouldn't be walking if it wasn't for you." She smiled. "Maybe. But they'll keep walking because of you." The weight of her words settled over him like a blanket. Heavy, inescapable. She was right. He knew she was right. But the thought of her leaving terrified him. Because she had become more than a caregiver. She had become the anchor, the belief, the hope that held everything together. Without her, what if it all fell apart? "Stay for 1 more week," he pleaded. "Just 1 more, to make sure they're stable." Aaliyah studied him for a moment. Then she sighed. 1 more week. But then I'm gone. And you're going to be fine." Relief flooded through him. 1 more week. 7 more days. It wasn't enough, but it was something. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded and unpacked her bag. That evening, he sat with the children in the living room, watching them play. Marcus was walking from toy to toy, his steps more confident each day. Emma was toddling around the coffee table, giggling every time she made a full lap. Samuel was taking cautious steps, falling less and less. They were thriving, growing, becoming the children he had always hoped they would be. But the fear was still there, lurking in the back of his mind. What if this was temporary? What if the progress stopped the moment Aaliyah left? What if he wasn't enough to keep them moving forward? He pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. The same app he had used to watch them from a distance for 6 months. But this time, he wasn't watching from afar. He was right here, present, engaged. He scrolled through the footage from the past 2 weeks, watched Marcus's first twitch, Emma's first stand, Samuel's first effort to sit up. He watched himself too. Saw the transformation from broken, grieving father to someone who showed up, who tried, who fought. Aaliyah had done more than heal his children. She had healed him. And now she was leaving. The thought was unbearable. Over the next week, he shadowed her constantly. Took notes on every technique, memorized every routine, asked 1,000 questions. What if Marcus refuses to walk one day? Then you encourage him. Be patient. Don't force it. What if Emma gets frustrated? Then you comfort her. Remind her how far she's come. What if Samuel regresses? Then you start over. Small steps, consistent effort. She answered every question with calm certainty. Never annoyed, never impatient. And slowly, he began to realize something. He already knew all of this. He had been watching, learning, practicing. He didn't need her to tell him what to do. He needed her to believe he could do it. And she did. She believed in him the same way she had believed in his children. On the final Friday, Aaliyah packed her bag again. This time, he didn't stop her. He stood in the doorway, watching, his heart heavy but his mind clear. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. She smiled. "You already have. By showing up, by not giving up, by being the father they needed." He swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Will I ever see you again?" She slung her bag over her shoulder. "Maybe, maybe not. But you don't need to. You have everything you need right here." She walked past him, pausing at the door. "Take care of them," she said. "I will. And take care of yourself." He nodded, unable to speak. And then she was gone. He stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, feeling the weight of her absence. But then he heard it. Laughter from the living room. Marcus was chasing Emma around the coffee table. Samuel was clapping his hands, giggling at his siblings. They were happy, healthy, thriving, because of her, but also because of him. He had shown up. He had fought. He had learned to hope again. And that was enough. He walked into the living room and knelt on the floor. Marcus immediately ran to him, crashing into his arms. Emma followed. Samuel toddled over, his arms outstretched. He held them close, his heart full, his eyes wet with tears. "It's just us now," he whispered. "But we're going to be okay." Marcus looked up at him and smiled. Emma giggled. Samuel squeezed his hand. And for the first time since his wife died, the father believed in the future. Not because someone else had convinced him, but because he had seen it with his own eyes. His children were walking. His children were thriving. His children were alive. And he was finally, truly present. Aaliyah had given him more than hope. She had given him the courage to believe in himself again. And that gift would last a lifetime. He looked around the penthouse, at the toys scattered across the floor, at the sunlight streaming through the windows, at the life that had been rebuilt from ashes. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. A beginning built on belief, patience, and love. A beginning he was ready to embrace. He pulled his children closer, his voice breaking as he whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise." And this time, he meant it. 3 months later, Marcus ran for the first time. Not walked. Ran. The father was working from home in Connecticut when he heard the pounding of tiny feet on hardwood. He looked up from his laptop, his heart jumping into his throat. Marcus burst through the office door, his face lit up with joy, his legs pumping as fast as they could carry him. "Daddy, watch me." He ran across the room, his arms swinging, his laughter echoing off the walls. The father's breath caught. His hands went slack. His laptop nearly slid off his lap. His son was running. The boy who doctors said would never walk was running through his office like paralysis had never touched him. Emma appeared in the doorway next, chasing her brother, her giggles filling the air. "Wait for me." Samuel toddled in behind them, slower but determined, his face scrunched up in concentration as he tried to keep up with his siblings. The father stood, his legs shaking, his vision blurring with tears. All three of them. Running, playing, living. He dropped to his knees as they crashed into him, their tiny bodies piling on top of him, their laughter mixing with his sobs. "You're running," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're actually running." Marcus pulled back, his face confused. "Why are you crying, Daddy?" The father laughed through his tears, pulling them all close. "Because I'm happy. So happy." That evening, after the children were asleep, he sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty wheelchairs still pushed against the wall. He hadn't been able to bring himself to get rid of them. Not yet. They were a reminder of how far they had come, of the battle they had fought and won. His phone buzzed. A text from his brother in Texas. "How are the kids?" He smiled, typing back quickly. "They're running." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Running? Like actually running? Like they were never paralyzed at all. His phone rang immediately. His brother's voice was thick with emotion. "I need to see this. I'm flying out next week." "You're welcome any time." They talked for an hour. About the children, about hope, about the woman who had changed everything. "Do you ever hear from her?" his brother asked. "From Aaliyah?" The father was quiet for a moment. "No. She said I wouldn't need to." "Was she right?" He looked at the pictures on the mantel. His children at the park last week, climbing on playground equipment. His children at their first doctor's appointment in months, where every specialist stood in stunned silence. His children living lives no one thought possible. "Yeah," he said softly. "She was right." After they hung up, he walked to the children's room and stood in the doorway, watching them sleep. Marcus was sprawled across his bed, one leg hanging off the edge. Emma was curled up with her stuffed bunny, her breathing soft and steady. Samuel was on his back, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. They looked normal, healthy, whole. No one who saw them now would ever guess they had been paralyzed 6 months ago. The father walked to Marcus's bed first, kneeling beside it. He brushed the hair from his son's forehead, his heart swelling with pride. "You're a fighter," he whispered. "You never gave up." He moved to Emma next, tucking her blanket around her shoulders. "You're so strong, baby girl, stronger than you know." Finally, he knelt beside Samuel's crib, his hand resting gently on his son's chest. "You're my miracle," he said quietly. "All 3 of you are." He stayed there for a long time, watching them sleep, feeling the weight of everything they had overcome. 6 months ago, He had been a broken man, hiding from his children, hiding from hope, hiding from life. But Aaliyah had forced him to stop hiding. She had shown him that miracles don't happen to those who wait for them. They happen to those who fight for them. And he had fought every single day. Through the doubt, the fear, the exhaustion, he had shown up, he had learned, he had believed. And because he believed, his children were thriving. The next morning, he took them to the park in Manhattan, watched them run across the grass, their laughter carrying on the wind. Watched them climb the jungle gym, their movements confident and strong. Watched them live the lives he thought were lost forever. Other parents stared, smiled, waved. No one knew. No one could tell that these three children had defied every medical prediction, every diagnosis, every limitation placed on them. They were just kids. Normal, happy, healthy kids. And that was the greatest miracle of all. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the park, the father gathered his children close. "I love you," he said, his voice steady. "I love you more than anything in this world." Marcus hugged him tight. Emma kissed his cheek. Samuel rested his head on his shoulder. "Love you too, Daddy," they said in unison. He closed his eyes, holding them close, feeling the weight of every moment that had led to this one. The grief, the loss, the 15 failures, the cameras, the hiding, the guilt. And then Aaliyah, the woman who had walked into his life and refused to accept its impossibility. She had given him more than just his children back. She had given him himself back. She had taught him that hope isn't foolish, it's powerful, it's necessary. It's the only thing that can turn tragedy into triumph. He would never forget her. Never forget what she had done. Never forget the way she had believed when no one else did. And he would make sure his children never forgot either. Because one day, when they were older, he would tell them the story of the woman who saved them, the story of the miracle that happened in a penthouse in Manhattan, the story of how 3 paralyzed children learned to walk, to run, to live, and the story of how a broken father learned to hope again. He opened his eyes, looking at his children, at their bright faces and their boundless energy. This was the life his wife had dreamed of for them, the life she had fought for until her last breath. And now, finally, it was real. "Come on," he said, standing and taking their hands. "Let's go home." They walked together through the park, the father and his 3 miracles, their laughter filling the air. And as they left, he glanced back one last time, half expecting to see Aaliyah standing there, watching with that quiet, knowing smile. But she wasn't there. She didn't need to be, because the miracle was complete. His children were walking, his family was whole, his heart was healed. And hope, the thing he thought he had lost forever, was alive and thriving in every step his children took. The cameras in the penthouse still recorded everything. But he didn't watch them anymore. He didn't need to, because he was no longer hiding, he was living. And that was the greatest miracle of all.